Hey, hello, and welcome to the Strength and Flexibility Summit. I'm Ian McLeod, co-hosting and one of the co-owners of Nirvana Strength. And on this particular episode, we have our speaker, Dr. Marie Belle. She has a PhD in developmental and biological psychology. She's going to be speaking with us in particular with regards to her yoga practice. And as a yoga teacher with her primary focus as a young Ashtanga instructor, she's currently in school for a wide range of things and array of things, particularly functional medicine, among other topics that we'll kind of get into here in a bit. So she does practice Ashtanga yoga, rocket yoga, and the yoga realm is quite diverse. So she's going to be delving a little bit deeper into that as a physical practice. She's an anthropologist of movement, and she continues to do online classes nowadays. So if you really enjoyed this interview, I would highly encourage you to go and take one of her classes because she's an amazing instructor. And I will end that bio there and let her talk a little bit more about herself because she has many, is like her bio is just like so long, it's amazing. But without further ado, Marie Belle, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Yeah, it wasn't, obviously like you have just so much stuff going on for you and you're like, I don't even know how you find time for all this stuff. It's like three people in one almost.
Yeah, I don't watch much TV. I don't watch any TV. I think it's a big portion of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So like one of the things, and I don't even know if we've even talked about this just through our normal conversations, but knowing that you have this PhD in developmental and biological psychology, how did you kind of get to the point where you are now, where your primary path in yoga?
Yeah, so I received my PhD at Virginia Tech, and while I was there, quite a few things like rerouted me. I received my PhD, and I've always enjoyed teaching young adults or people who actually want to be there. And in psychology, it was a big portion of research and travel, and I wanted to know why people do what they do. And as a psychologist, I was interested in how culture impacts us in regards to how we express our emotions, our beliefs about emotions, and how we learn to just express them. And in the process of that, I felt that psychology was getting me to a certain degree of understanding that was very intellectual and very beautiful and not complete. And so the more I started practicing yoga, the more I started getting into the embodied aspect of knowing and just knowing for myself. So it gave me the tools to go deeper and know it in my body versus just talk about it intellectually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we think about and one thing that I really find quite interesting with your training methodology is that you kind of incorporate a lot of different modalities. And I think that's one thing that makes you, I mean, you're probably one of the most like physically like hardworking like yogis I've ever met. You're crazy strong,
Mm-hmm.
and you find what really works for you, and you apply it, and you're not closed off to exploring other training protocols or trying other things that might be beneficial for you. So when you think about your training program now, or your progress over the last few years, how has your training style developed since you first started doing yoga?
Yeah. Well, when I first started, I would do one thing and get really good at it and enjoy it and kind of become fanatical about it, which I still am like that. So if I find something that works, I just do it and I learn all there is to know about it. With that being said, the cool thing with my doctorate is I'm very interested in variations and differences. So when you mentioned my bio as an anthropologist of movement, that's pretty much the most freeing way I can see how I train. Because back in the day, and even to this day, people who practice Ashtanga and get very serious about it, basically that becomes their whole identity. And when I got really into Ashtanga, I let go of everything. I let go of running. I let go of rock climbing. I let go of handstands. I let go of everything because I had one mission. And that was to devote myself to this practice. But to be honest, with that, a lot of injury started coming about, or a lot of irritability as well. Like my nervous system was shot. So in the last like 5 or so years, I just decided to start incorporating other methodologies at work. And I'm really grateful because it also brought life back to my practice. And instead of being, I felt like I was becoming like a fanatical. I feel like now it's more well-structured, holistic, and sustainable. The main one that drew me to other arts were I was in India and I got a major back injury. And so in that process, I had to check myself, and it made sense that this would happen because I wasn't doing anything else. So it was just overtrained and over contorted every single day.
Would you say that through your experiences, are there any particular like other training protocols or modalities that you find you particularly found beneficial for yourself to continue with, and that maybe others would benefit from implementing it to their practice?
Yeah, so for me, I will speak for people who practice Ashtanga or contortion or yeah, I'll keep it at that for now. Squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts for me are where it's at. Another way to say that with your language or anybody who knows about the body would be like posterior chain. I getting your posterior chain very, very strong will be an asset in most things. And I think a big thing when I first started, I didn't know there was a difference between strong and tight. So I felt that if I got stronger, I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing. And that simply wasn't true. I could still be strong and flexible. So I would say strength training with weights. And then hanging was another really good one, just hanging off of a bar for 1 to 5 minutes a day. And I just recently started walking 10,000 steps a day, and I can't believe I wasn't walking before. And I totally understand why everyone gets injured if we're not walking 5 miles a day. Because our legs can't support the amount of work that we're doing, like our hip flexors are chronically shortened. Um, so yeah, I would say definitely strengthen your posterior chain, hang, and walk.
And I think you kind of hit on one particular point that I think is quite overlooked in the fitness realm, and what people think about with regards to training is like how do we actually like combat the things that we do in our daily lives, right? And how do we combat
Mm-hmm.
this idea that we are continuing to shorten our range of movement, right? So when you think about your practice as a yogi, how do you find the best way to maintain that balance between strength and flexibility? I think there are quite a lot of people who are very flexible, and they might actually be scared to, like you just said, like squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts, and some very flexible people would be like, oh, no way, I can't do that. I'll lose my flexibility. Um, like, what would you recommend with regards to maybe that mindset, but also to like what would be a better way of looking at it? What's a better approach with regards to gaining strength for someone like that?
Um, I would say injury prevention. So under the umbrella of injury prevention and range. So a big thing that I've always had as a goal, whether in my academic studies or in my physical studies, was I want as much range as possible. And so when I got major range in my flexibility, I thought I had gained enough to go ahead and start incorporating more strength. And so for me, I've started learning about goals and balance. So I would say to have more range and to have more options and to be more sustainable, kind of balance out that. And so now my flexibility comes a little bit more from a strengths-based approach. Not as strength-based as yours, but still, as a whole, I don't see them as dichotomy. It's not one or the other. It's not flexible or strong. You can have a both and. And so I would say range, injury prevention, and sustainability, and just general overall health. And for me also, I care about physique. And so I do want to have a strong physique, not just a very easily contorted one, which I can have as well.
Yeah, I think probably to some degree, like through our interactions, like there's definitely been times where we've like shared our some of the ways we train, and for sure, like I've done a lot more like flexibility stuff, and particularly since I opened up Nirvana Strength, but even more so since I've like started meeting high level practitioners like yourself. And so I do find it quite difficult. So like if we take, let's say, the other side with regards to your approach to flexibility for like, let's say someone like myself, like when, when we first met, I was probably not anywhere close to as flexible as I am now. But like, what would be your general approach for someone who's very, very like just a big guy who's just super tight?
I would actually go different than what you are doing. I really like long holds, and I like to sit in a pose for a while. It doesn't mean collapse or passively zone out, but definitely stay in something for a while. So instead of like sliding in splits, instead of sliding your foot forward and back 10 times, 3 sets of that, I would say stay put for 2 minutes. And then like if there was a block underneath you, so you're at like 30% for 30 seconds, then take the block down. So then you're at 60% for 30 seconds, take the block down again, 60 more seconds, and then the last one, no block. I would say you would have your splits in less than a month doing that. Because it's true. And that's how the Russian circus, when I trained with them, that's how I got my middle splits and my splits on point in less than a month, was just longer holds. It's not necessarily the safest because as I did, well, mine was 5 minutes. That's why for you, I told you to. But if one gets too flexible too fast, the low back and the spine might start talking back. And that's when I started getting my back injuries because I got so flexible, my muscles weren't holding me up. Tightness is also stability. So I would say if you're working on getting very flexible, also work on movements that will stabilize you immediately after, which I wasn't doing. So for you, I would say, or for a big dude, I would say, let's learn to hold, because that way your muscles are also supple and soft, all the while like super mega strong.
Right. And so when we think about this idea of even doing like longer holds, um, how would you characterize those holds? Because the way you talk about it is that it seems that even in the hold, you're still being somewhat active, like active in the sense that you're being like
Yeah.
easily engaged, like you're not just like
Yeah.
arbitrarily
Yeah.
lying.
So the legs are engaged for sure. I would say press the feet down, hug the shin, like engage the thighs, lift up everything, less weight on your hands. So it's like very beautiful posture in the upper body. The upper body isn't collapsed. Your face isn't like struggling. So that's a big thing that you pointed out when you watched me train is like, I've trained my upper body to be independent than my lower body. And so if I'm doing something that's really, really challenging in my legs, you don't see that in my face and you don't see that in my shoulders. And so that's something that I would say when someone's working on their longer holds is to keep the legs engaged and then figure out the pelvic tilt that they need in that posture and then stay upright. So the whole upper body shows no signs of stress. Another way to say that is to learn to regulate yourself while going into the deepest poses you've ever gone into. So a lot of it is physiological regulation, which then I would also talk about breath. So I would engage the muscles, slow down the breath, and clean up your face.
I do, because the face thing is quite funny, like I coming from an American football background and just not doing a lot of stretching, you see a lot of the big guys, like as soon as they hit anywhere close to the end range, like their face just goes crazy.
Yeah, it's fun to watch.
And that's one thing that I really, like you could do like super intense stuff and you got straight up poker face. And I,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm,
have independence. So that's the thing that I've been cultivating is independence and range. So like one of my coaches would say, teach your hips to be hips and your face to be a face, or teach your hips to be hips and your spine to be a spine. Just because I'm opening up my hips doesn't mean that my spine needs to flex and round down. So it's like, can you keep this while doing something really challenging?
Mm.
And if I'm making a face, hopefully that's my last 5 seconds. And even then, I wouldn't necessarily go there. I go to that space where I can still maintain my composure and stay there for long periods of time. And gradually, that space gets wider and wider, kind of like swimming underwater. I don't go to the point where when I come out of water, I'm out of breath, but I'm quite close, if that makes sense.
No, totally, and it's definitely something. Even like one of our other friends, Coach Wu Chuanfu from China, he talks a lot about how the Chinese have, they lift super heavy weights, but they look incredibly calm when they're doing it. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
a lot of powerlifters kind of have the opposite, where they look like they're just going to explode while they're
Yeah.
lifting the weight. So they're very facially demonstrative.
Yeah. And I would say that looks fun too. I'm not knocking any of that. I think that looks fun, and the human body can do a lot of things. But because we're coming from like yoga and flexibility and stuff, that's what I'm mentioning.
Mm.
I think I need to make more faces.
So if we're going back to yoga, right? And we have
Uh-huh.
obviously you delve into a lot of different types of yoga, and there's kind of a wide array of things that can be spoken about. But if we talk about your primary kind of focus in Ashtanga, like how did you go about deciding that was that the first like type of yoga that you were exposed to, or like how did you decide on that as a primary focus?
Yeah. So when I first started yoga, I didn't know there were different styles. I thought yoga was yoga. And most classes at the time in the early 2000s were called yoga. They didn't have the word Ashtanga or Rocket or Iyengar or Vinyasa. They didn't have any of those words prefacing it. That was also before yoga started being branded in the United States, kind of, I mean, in the 90s, it kind of hit. But anyway, so when I first started yoga, I just went to yoga in the gym, and it was an hour-long class. And then I made a best friend there, and she and I decided to do a teacher training shortly after, and that was called Ashtanga. That was my first introduction to Ashtanga, was just seeing it. And so when I read about it, I saw that it was from India, which to me means it's legit. I was like, okay, this is the one I want. This is the classical one. This is the one that everyone pulls from. And so I started doing it, one, because of proximity. It fit in my calendar, and by accident. And I fell in love with it. So it's my first love. Um, what I really like about Ashtanga, and I still very much appreciate, is its focus on practice. And it's just like, however much you put in it is how much you're going to get out. So the focus was on creating a daily practice, daily rituals of moving and connecting with your breath. And there's different series. There's primary series, second series, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And the majority of human beings stay in primary. Like 90% of people stay in primary series. And primary series is hard. It's really, I remember being like, if I just get halfway through, I'll be happy. Because at the time I was boxing and I was biking. So my shoulders were forward and I was more protected. So it was everything that was like reaching back was hard. Everything that was forward folding was hard. I was training to bike across the country. So my legs were very tight, and cramps would wake me up in the middle of the night. Anyway, so it was my first love. I like hierarchy. I study hierarchy. I appreciate power structures to an extent. It was something that I could feel every day I was getting quote unquote good at. Um, I could go deeper into my body. Oh, the other thing with Ashtanga is that there is no talking, which to me, I really wanted. I didn't want anyone's opinion on anything. We just set up and start practicing and move at our own rate, which was amazing. And if I forget something, the teacher comes over and reminds me. So it kind of taught me how to work with myself, by myself, in community. And then from there, of course, I started doing other ones. I don't know if you want me to talk about the other ones since you asked about Ashtanga, but yeah,
So
I
so one
still have a lot of love for it. Mm?
So one thing that you do hit on, and you talked a little bit about it, was I was going to ask is like how does Ashtanga differentiate from the other styles of yoga primarily? And I think you talked about how it focuses on the practice, and I do find that the people that I have met that is their primary focus also tends to be some of the strongest like practitioners that I've met. Would you also characterize that as like because there's such a high physical component that generally they're more, I don't know, physically
Yeah.
strong?
Yeah, for sure. And like, in the West nowadays, most yoga is physical, is just what they do with that physicality. And so the main difference with Ashtanga, I mean, I want to share something. So there's Ashtanga, the philosophy, which is Ashta is eight, Anga is limb, the eight-limbed path, which most practices at this point do the eight-limbed path. Within that world, there's Ashtanga Vinyasa, which is kind of what I'm talking about. So that's the physical practice.
Mm.
Underneath the umbrella of the philosophy. So the physical practice of Ashtanga, that as it's taught in Mysore, India, the really cool thing, and some people don't agree with it, is we learn one posture at a time. So let's say I'm teaching you sun salutations and standing, and when we get to a particular pose, it's just not happening in your body. It's like, yeah, no. It's like, okay, we found your pose. That's the point where you're working up until every single day until you figure it out. And then once you figure it out, the teacher teaches you a new pose. And you keep going from there until you start finding roadblocks in your body or in your mind or in your psyche where it's just like, I need to work here. And so it's one posture at a time. The reason a lot of people don't agree with it is because those postures are maybe not functional or necessary or useful. Some of them are contortion, like, all right, bring your foot behind your head. Can't do it? Okay, stay here forever, which is not really helpful. But I like it because I appreciate structure, and a lot of people who like to train or who do enjoy being in their bodies may appreciate that. It's like, all right, I have a challenge. This next month, I'm going to figure this one out. And so I appreciate that. And vinyasa has stemmed from that. And power yoga, rocket yoga, most yogas have stemmed out of Ashtanga. So vinyasa yoga doesn't require you to be able to do posture A before you go to B or C or D. So maybe you're practicing handstands before you could even touch your toes, or maybe you're practicing, I don't know, some bird of paradise or standing balancing pose when you didn't do the previous ones, right? So a lot of yogas now have taken those rules out or those prerequisites out. When I was traveling through India, everyone else in India, anytime I would say yoga, they were talking about meditation. So that's a big piece to keep in mind. So we're talking about like Western yoga at this point. And when I was in Rishikesh and Dharamshala in the north and told them that I was in Mysore, their response was like, you were in the boot camp of yoga. So that would be like a quick way to summarize it. It is very, very physical. And it's not just physical as in you're using your body, but we do chaturanga, up dog, down dog, which is a push-up, up dog and down dog, about 70 times a day. So if you're not getting strong from that, it's just, I don't know any other practice that does that many vinyasas.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot of good points you hit, and like with regards to having a set structure. I think a lot of people nowadays, when they're going about their training regimen, like they end up kind of changing and bouncing around so much that they end up kind of creating a lot of bad habits, for one.
Yeah.
I've spoken with a couple of the coaches with regards to, people are so quick to want to try to acquire positions, or they're so quick to try something that is probably above their current level. So like with regards to setting like realistic expectations as to what they should be able to perform, maybe they can do, a higher level movement, and they are able to adapt at this moment in time. But these are things that end up, if your body is not actually fully prepared for that, at some point it will kind of fall apart and break. So when we think about the development of practitioners in, let's say, in the yoga realm, where do you generally see most of the kind of holes and gaps in the general populace when they when with their approach to their physical yoga practice?
Um, I would say like definitely strength. Strength is missing. Awareness of breath is there, but yeah, I would definitely say strength is a major one. Um, Strength beyond what's going on, or even like multidimensionality, being good at other things. um, but yeah, you and I have talked about this, and outside of Ashtanga, I do appreciate that you mentioned how sometimes people pick and choose, which could be really beautiful, and it is. It also doesn't necessarily focus on what's difficult for you and developing that fully. So back to your question, I would say strength and then an awareness of how to move forward or how to move from there. So, okay, I did this, now what? So a common question I get asked behind the scenes is like, how do I come up with how I'm going to train? Is this like, how do you shift it up? Um, because at least in Ashtanga, it's the set sequence every day. So how do you decide what else needs help? For me, I would say supplemental work is missing and strength training is missing.
So, and I think there's a one thing that kind of fits in with what you're talking about, how where when people are like just picking and choosing like what things they want to do, they end up kind of choosing obviously the things that they're probably already kind of good at, right? They
Mm-hmm.
if they do end up trying something that is very demonstrative of like how weak they are in that particular movement, then they'll just kind of find a reason as to just bypass it or just not do it at all and not actually address like maybe like why are they particularly weak in that movement. So with regards to like changing people's mindset with regards how do they deal with these weaknesses in their practice, was there ever a time where like you didn't want to do certain movements because it was just like too
Yeah.
difficult, or and then how did you like change that to your current mindset now? And I think it has a lot to do with how you your mindset with regards to how you train, which is I think is very important, especially with strength and flexibility.
Yeah, so there's different ones. There were definite like postures where I got stuck, and I started finding reasons why I shouldn't do it. Like it's not functional, it's not useful, it's just contortion. With that being said, I could see that if I trained it, I would get it. So for me, I do appreciate a challenge, and I do drop out of a challenge here and there. Um, and I do see that happening where when something gets really challenging, people could easily drop out. But I don't know, like I wanted to mention a few things from the beginning of the question about how people pick and choose. And I think at that point, then we're also talking about specialists versus generalists. Like one of my friends found out he really liked and enjoyed training handstands. So in less than 3 years, he became a one-armed arm balancer. It doesn't mean he didn't work his flexibility. It just means he doesn't see the point in bringing your foot behind your head. So he's just not going to do that. And so there are people who specialize and do really well. In the process of specializing, you start specializing in other things. But for me, I kind of need you to ask me the question again in regards to, so were there postures that were difficult for me? Yes. And pointed out where I needed to train better? Yes. But I don't think that's what you asked.
So I mean, I guess it was kind of two parts as to like
Yeah.
what, how would you change people's mindset with regards to dealing with,
Mm.
uh, being confronted with an obstacle and then actually like overcoming that. Um,
Yeah.
and I understand that like your friend, like maybe just clearly like just doesn't have interest in doing certain things, and I can understand that. But if you're highly interested, let's say in the Ashtanga practice, but then you start kind of picking and choosing the things you want to do, it kind of works like against what the practice is.
Yeah. 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 And I'm okay with that now. um, okay. So I would say that the main word I would use for people when they find an obstacle and how to deal with it would be like, think of it as performance enhancement. So it's kind of like, what can I do to become better? Or here is a blind spot that I have, or here is something for me to work with. And you have all of the tools to work with it. Because in the grand scheme of things, for me, I remember seeing some people who were quite impressive, and I asked them how long it took them to get there, and they were like, that took about 5 years. And for me at the time, because I was in academia, 5 years is nothing. Nothing. In the grand scheme of things, 5 years is nothing. And it's a lot. And so for me, it's just like good work takes time. And so I would keep chiseling away every single day, kind of like a sculptor. You know, every day you're kind of sculpting a little bit, and doesn't look like much at first, and then gradually you see the main effects of that. The really cool thing with the practices I do is that if you get really good at one thing, it's kind of like slingshotting you forward. At the time, it might feel like you're being pulled back. And I know that when I started working with you, there was a lot of resistance. Because for me, I could tell that training muscle ups, for example, was really messing with my ability to bind or contort or back bend, because my upper back was getting like fuller. The cool thing you pointed out, and I did experience, is that that was temporary. So if my body like responds to stress for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then it leans out again. And that was the main portion I wasn't pushing past. Maybe not pushing, but living past. And so if I started weight training and then the next day I couldn't do anything, I realized I would assume that weight training was blocking me, because I was going from one day to the next, versus putting things on hold for about a week or 6, right? And so recently I started putting particular goals of yoga on hold for 6 weeks while training something, and then coming back and being way stronger and just finishing third series. So for me, a mixed methods approach, if that makes sense. I'll try the way it is, and then I know there are rules around that. I don't really care, because they're not like, I don't live my life by other people's rules, and I like learning them.
Yeah.
I think I have never shared with you, but like, I remember when I first started branching out a little bit, like 6 years ago or so, the teacher I was working with at the time told me, if I was going to continue doing other things other than Ashtanga, I would have to find a new teacher. Um, and at that point I was like, okay, I'll find a new teacher. I don't know what to tell you. Like, some people I do believe do overstep their boundaries and their beliefs about how good something is in and of itself. I would never tell someone they need to stop having a high quality of life in order to practice. So,
And I think, and for sure, like obviously, if there are certain requirements, if you wanted to just have a primary focus. So I'm sure, like your friend who, is working on handstands. If we think about in the handstand realm, like there's obviously certain areas that he wouldn't want to bypass just to work on a higher level movement, because that would eventually come back, at him.
yeah.
But I think my place, particularly like, when we're talking, we're working together and throwing ideas at each other is, how do we, work around or work with like what your focus is in your life and what's important to you. Because I do feel like, and I think this is something you probably do very well with your clients as well, or and your students, is that you're taking in consideration like what are their particular goals and what do they actually want to accomplish. And you think about the time commitment that you were talking about to reach certain physical goals or whatnot. And you say 5 years and you're like, oh, there's nothing. But there's a lot of people that would listen to that and be like, 5 years is like unreal. Like how can I commit
Yeah,
that?
but this was an extreme pose. This
Yeah.
isn't just like it took me 5 years to touch my toes. This was like foot behind the head, arm balance, look glorious while doing it, you know? But yeah,
So,
so majority of people wouldn't want 5 years, is what you're saying?
well, I mean, obviously relative to what the goal is. And I think, there's probably a lot of people that would look at a particular posture or a particular move and they'd want the results as quickly as possible. How do you work with people setting like realistic expectations as to the time commitment required to reach certain positions or certain movements when you speak with them?
Um, hmm. Yeah, for me, time isn't that big of a deal. I always would say like a year from now, you're gonna wish you had started today. So go ahead and just start today and we'll see how long things take. Good work takes time. I do have people reaching out to me behind the scenes who want to get their splits down by like their photo shoot next week. And when I ask what their split training looks like now, they don't have it. So at that point, I feel like it's a lack of humility and a lack of like real like understanding of how much work goes on behind the scenes. um, Again, like how long did it take you to do that? It's just like, well, I held it for 2 minutes a day every day for years. So there are particular things that take a lot of time. Now if they want something, I don't really usually have people who want a pose by a particular time. What I do offer them is breaking it down to components and figuring out what it is that's holding them back. Often what I have found with like intermediate practitioners, it's really just technique. It's not that they need to get stronger or more flexible, is that they need to know how to do it. And so that's a big gap. Going back to the question, I hadn't even thought of this, is a lot of yoga teachers don't know how to teach. They might know how to tell you to inhale, hands up, look up, exhale, touch the floor, bend your elbows, you know that. But they don't know that if you root the tailbone more or tilt the pelvis in such a way, the hip will open up more. Or if you're put like anteriorly tilted, this isn't going to work. And so that is something that I see students come to me for, thinking that they can't, for example, get their foot behind their head. And I ask them to tuck their tail more, and all of a sudden they're a lot closer. So for me, I feel like technique would be the main way to get to it. I know I answered it in different portions because I hope what you're hearing is it depends what level the student already is in, depends on the level of humility and how much work they're willing to put in. Like I have a student who's coming every single day, and in less than a year, she's like advanced extremely well. I say it's because she's doing the work every day. She says it's because like I cue her perfectly. She's like, no one knows those cues. How do you know that? And for me, it's just looking at the person and being like, oh, your pelvis or your shoulder or whatever.
So you're talking about this idea of, instructors kind of missing the ability to actually teach, right? Like, so they kind of memorize
Mhm.
these systems, and this is how they're implementing their strength protocols or their flexibility protocols, or how they instruct people. And you say it about yoga, but it's very common among quite a lot of other physical disciplines in the fitness realm. Like personal
Mhm.
trainers, like they just learn some system. They pass a very basic cert program. Like I just saw a cert program on Instagram for $25, and it's like become a personal trainer. And I was like how would you characterize that as the like kind of the biggest like gap in the like the 200-hour kind of cert extravaganza that it's kind of become?
Well, the online extravaganza or like the last 10 years extravaganza. So
Yeah.
I'll share different ones. I'll talk about the online one in a second. But in regards to Ashtanga, for example, you do realize there is no teacher training for Ashtanga. I mean, there is in the United States because we do what we want over here. But as a whole, in India, the way I would get authorized to teach is if I go to India and I practice in the shala, in the studio space, every single day for however long he sees me fit. And then at one point, either I asked for it. It used to be the teacher would say, "You're ready to teach," and you'd be authorized.
Mm.
Please realize that all that means is that I went and practiced every day for years. At no point did we talk about anatomy, philosophy, business, ethics, anything at all. So what's happening is we have all these people who are great practitioners to an extent, and then they're asked to teach. And it's like, it doesn't translate like that, right?
Mm.
For some people it does, but not for everyone. So I would say that's the main issue I have with the India version of it, is there's no talking about how to go about it. Here in the United States, there's a big focus on like sounding like your teacher or repeating your teacher or sounding like a pro. And really, I just don't see people looking at the body that's right in front of them. And so if I'm teaching you, my cues when I'm teaching you are very different than if I'm teaching Zion, not Zion, but like someone else, as just I looked over to him. But yeah, learning how to personalize your teaching is a major piece, and that is missing. or how to teach to who is in front of you. I guess a big portion would be like, well, what are you even teaching? What's the point of this class? You know? So yeah, I think a big portion is technique. Oh, the other piece I wanted to mention about India, which gets joked around a lot, is there's these bandhas, these locks that we talk about from an energetic perspective. And one of them is your pelvic floor lock. So you lift your pelvic floor up, belly is in, and that's basically your postural muscles are engaged and you're lifted. And often back in the day when I couldn't do something, I had asked my teacher, and my teacher was like, Mula Bandha, just engage your Mula Bandha. And to me, it's just like, you just don't know how to teach. You don't know how to like tell me to stack my shoulders over my wrists and externally rotate my shoulders and bring the belly in and engage my legs. Like, it's not Mula Bandha. So often people would get away with it by using esoteric terms and not actually teaching the hows. Another piece I've gotten in trouble for within the Ashtanga world is that I teach people how to do it. And I've had people, like, when we're planning out our programs, be like, well, I don't tell them everything. You got to let them figure it out. And for me, I don't need to hide anything. If it's better if your hands are shoulder width apart, why wouldn't I just tell them that? So I'm not trying to play mind games with them and be like, all right, do it every day. So students who practice with me do get like much further physically. Because I'm not hiding anything.
It is kind of funny that you would, get into trouble where people would look at you oddly for actually explaining how to do something when that's kind of the point of, I mean, it would be like just saying, like, even let's say for handstand practice, like you give them a drill and then just be like, all right, just figure it out. And then I'll see you when you get it. It's like,
yeah,
for me, it would be a very unusual way of going about being a teacher or coach.
yeah. I mean, their excuse is that yoga is beyond asana, and I'm like, for sure. And and I don't see me teaching the pose, like in regards to like how to structure yourself, as blasphemy. It's just interesting that some people use fewer words. And for me, when I was in India, the reason they used fewer words is because there was 500 of us in one room, and his primary language is not English.
Yeah.
Not because it's a superior form of teaching. So yeah.
So I think, I mean, there's a lot of points you hit on with regards to like personalizing and getting like programs and getting an instructor that is willing to customize even the cues to the specific person to help them better understand. And it's not, I wouldn't agree with like maybe other people's perspective in that it's not you necessarily like, you're not giving away the answers of a test, and you are actually like actively helping them by not necessarily just telling them what to do, but actually showing them like what can they do to help learn the position better. So I think there's some massive massively different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and another word that I would use is empowering for the student. I'm showing the student, like, sharing tools. It's not that you're not strong. It's not that you're more flexible, because that was another thing I would constantly get from my teachers is like, you just need to get stronger. And I'm like, I don't know how I could possibly get any stronger. I don't think strength is a piece that I have to work on this. And it was alignment. And so, yeah, I think there's a deprecation of the student, or like there's a student teacher relationship at times where the teacher is higher than and it has all the answers and you must do particular things in order to get their blessing. And I'm not like that. I'm more like a dialogue with my students, and we're gradually getting better, and I'm not trying to create enmeshment or have my students like stay with me forever, although that is a goal for a lot of people. That's not a goal of mine. My goal is like that they can soar and they can do their own thing. Yeah, I think there's enough.
Right. So if you were talking to, any number of people who have maybe already received their 200-hour certification, and, they want to go into the realm of coaching or teaching, and they want to be able to, progress better as a instructor. And so, they almost kind of follow along what you were saying, where like they get this 200-hour cert, they have like maybe the most basic understanding, and then they're just like, all right, go out into the world and figure out the next 2,000 hours of your teaching career. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you think about some, like, what would be beneficial for someone like that to be able to take part in, or how would they go about figuring out like the strength component that you talked about, the flexibility component, the like just the knowledge of like learning technique, not just from their own physical practice, but how to actually recognize it and make the proper corrections.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, what I'm hearing is continuing education. And then I just remembered you asked the question about the yoga teacher training extravaganza. And it's just like people being like on, what's it called when you're on the super fast track? And it's like, hurry up and get your cert, hurry up and get your cert. And a lot of things, the issue with Yoga Alliance is there is no audit. So Yoga Alliance isn't making sure that the teacher training you're taking is up to code and is covering anything useful. And so in some trainings, most trainings, they're not following through with what they're supposed to be. And so for me, regardless of what's going on in the teacher training I'm a participant of, I did a lot of continuing education. I would find the people whom I had admired, whether it's because of the way they spoke or their handstand, or it didn't matter what ability it was, whatever it was, I would train with them. So whether it was a 200-hour, a 50-hour, a weekend workshop. And so I started purposefully expanding my exposure because for me, I could see there were holes in what I was practicing. I still love it. And I can see that there's some drawbacks to it, and I can see how it could become elitist. And my focus isn't on the elite only. My focus, I want it to be general audience. So I would say find people who are doing things you like and train with them. So like I even went out of my way and I got a coach. And I was like, help me do this. For no reason, I want to learn how to do a muscle up. I want to know how to flag. So I started like finding coaches and hiring coaches as a client. I didn't even have to like sign up for a course, you know? So I would say hire people and keep the flow going and then do your homework. And there's like different people like hand balancers I've worked with who give me work, and just one session, I know I have a year's worth of work to do. So find the people and train with them and do continuing education.
Yeah. So if we think about continuing education with regards to strength and flexibility and learning more about the body and let's say actual application of that knowledge, there's like thousands and thousands of different options with regards to continuing education, right? And how would someone go about actually selecting a program that would be truly beneficial to the progression that they want to go, instead of just kind of arbitrarily choosing something out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I work through it is personalize it. So like again, there is something this woman has that I want, and or the way this person's doing whatever it is physically, I want to do that. So for me, I follow the people's journeys. Um, if I see like an Instagram ad for this strength training program, I might click on it, but I go to their page. And if their page doesn't really have a journey or a story, and I don't do it. So I don't do most things that are mass produced. And I do most things that are personalized. Um, I know for me, for example, like I have been seeing this hole and we've been talking about it, and we are going to do continuing education. So whoever you're listening to, see what they're doing. And our continuing education ideally is in January. Um, so again, I would just go by the people that you admire. You don't have to go mass produce and super cheap.
Yeah, I think you hit.
Zion
Yeah,
agrees.
Zion agrees. Yeah. But you hit on a couple of points there, right? I think are really important. Like one, finding instructors or practitioners that have these educational programs, but are also actually like doing what they're promoting. So
Hmm.
you don't, you want them to have the skills that you actually want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So too, like you want the stories to some extent because you want to see that they actually can produce the results that you want as well. Because obviously there's a massive difference between the practitioner and the coach and the trainer. Um, and I think there's definitely a lot of really interesting points that you hit with regards to like how do you choose continued education, and I think that one main point with regards to personalizing is really important.
Hmm.
How do you see your practice and your coaching and teaching developing into the future with all your current educational projects that you're doing?
Yeah. So, um, I'm kind of interested, I definitely am interested in collaborating and doing more co-teaching. So for the last 8 or so years, most of the trainings I've done, I'm just the lead trainer. I do 180 hours of it by myself. And I finally reached a point where I'm like, I don't want to do everything by myself all the time. So now I'd like to combine skill sets. And so the program coming up in January, for example, is my friend, and she's a contortionist and a hand balancer. And then there's me with yoga, and there's some strength stuff to it. I don't know how much I can talk about it, but yeah. So I see a lot more collaborations across disciplines. Um, so again, I'm using a mixed methods approach to training that is more holistic, sustainable, and focused on injury prevention, which to me is just intelligent training, and tapping into and going beyond just yoga. And it will only benefit your yoga practice as well. So collaborations, and I've really liked gymnastic strength training and weight-based, like squats and stuff like that. So anything that combines those aspects.
Yeah, I definitely, I think when people think of strength and flexibility, they kind of almost think of them as separate things. And, you have your strength stuff, which is the big weights, and then you have your flexibility stuff, which is, it's funny, like nowadays people will be like, hey, you want to get more flexible? Just do yoga. And they just kind of
Mm.
just throw you over there. One thing that is very common in amongst most of the speakers that are, I think pretty much all of them, but we all think of strength and flexibility as something that is combined, and you put it together in a balanced way that is reflective of like what you want to accomplish as a person, right, and what your particular goals are. So I think yeah, all those things that, I mean, pretty much everything that we've talked about kind of encompasses all that.
Yeah. Another piece I didn't mention of where I'm going, I'm also starting to include more chill stuff. Like starting next week, I'm going to be training for like more chill embodied practices, which my body definitely needs. So it's not always like intense and laborious. Is that a word? Like labor intensive. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, another piece I'm shifting towards is more like calming practices, yoga nidra, embodied yoga, stuff like that. And yeah, I agree that like yoga as a blanket term is kind of misleading. I mean, we don't do that with dance. I guess some people do, but there's ballet, there's hip hop. Same thing with capoeira even. There's Angola, there's contemporary, that kind of stuff. So it's not just one thing,
Right.
but
So
yeah.
you kind of talk. I mean, you hit on it just a little bit, but if I could get your thoughts on like what kind of things do you do for recovery from your treatment?
Mm.
So like you're doing like rock climbing, you're doing like obviously you have your yoga practice, your handstands, you have your weight training. At some point you're probably doing something that is maybe less intensive, which with regards to strength and flexibility are also very important to help um, recover and adapt from and just make your growth. So can you talk a little bit about your recovery protocols and what you think might be beneficial for other people to try?
Yeah, I mean, my recovery protocols are not necessarily what I would recommend other people to do. The reason I say that is because my recovery days to my friends who don't train like I do, they're like, wait, this is your chill day? Like, how is this your chill day? So for me, I still hike and walk often. So that for me is a chill thing. Um, Yesterday we accidentally did 7 miles, but still as a whole, it's just like go and do something different that's pleasant and joyful. For me, it's walking, hiking. I've started doing just like prop based rest. So I'll put like a block behind my upper back and behind my head and just lay there. I use like the wheel. I do a lot of stretching. I'm trying to think. I've started working on my sleep, which is a major one. Um, I didn't realize how bad I was sleeping until recently, how poorly I was sleeping. But yeah, I would say like the prop-based stuff, another way to say that's restorative, or like legs up the wall, hiking, walking. And I've also scaled back my schedule quite significantly from teaching so much. I was teaching 15 classes a day, and in Zoom life nowadays, it means I'm practicing an extra 15 times a week.
Right.
So I've scaled that back. I wonder if there's anything else. I mean, if I had a sauna or I have bathtub, I'll do bathtub, but if I had a sauna, I would do that all the time. And then massage,
Mm.
getting a massage once a month at least. Ideally, mine would be every week, but I'm not doing that.
But I mean, I think, though you stay, relatively physically active in your recovery days or your rest days, I would one thing I would kind of separate between the way you train and those rest days is that it's probably not as like intensive on the central nervous system. Like it's probably just more chill and you're just walking around as opposed to like holding a really hard position for a long period of time, which can be very
Mhm.
hard on your nervous system.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so definitely the recovery stuff is quite important. I think for sure, um, you know, there's just so many different things that can be done. I think it's really important for you don't want to do something that's going to cause you more stress. Like for example, like some people just absolutely despise ice baths, and though it could be very beneficial, like if it just cause you so much just like distress to be able to do an ice bath, it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I think at Nirvana, I did like 2 seconds and I'd get out, and I did it 3 times, and I was very proud of myself.
That's-
People are staying for minutes. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not committed. No, thank you. But yeah,
but it's still
I
good.
also have a breath practice thing, resonance breathing.
Okay.
So resonance breathing is slowing down your breath to 5 or 6 breaths per minute. And there's an app, it's free. It's called the Breathing app. And Moby, the artist, and Eddie Stern came up with it. And you can set it in such a way that you have a metronome and you're inhaling for 5 or 6 seconds and exhaling for 5 or 6 seconds. And that puts your brain in a particular state of regeneration, restoring, and just like chilling out. It's really, really cool. And you could do it for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're coming close to the end here. I really do appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I am really looking forward to seeing what these collaborative projects you have going on, particularly the one coming up in January. And I think that you know, the way you talk about there are certain gaps in the realm of like getting certifications and getting continued education and learning more about how to actually like improve strength and flexibility as opposed to just the systematic approach. I think a lot of that stuff is going to come out obviously in some of maybe your future coursework. And I think that would be something that's actually really quite interesting and very beneficial to not just those that already have their 200-hour certs, but really anybody who's looking forward to improving their strength and flexibility in unique, very effective ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you everyone that has taken their time to listen to this chat with Marie Belle. And we would love to have you join us for future conversations and talks, I'm sure we'll have in the future. They will follow you by going to Instagram.
Marie, yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram, Marie Belle PR. That'll be true for everything. MarieBellePR.com, Marie Belle PR Gmail. I'm sure there's other things that are Marie
Yeah,
Belle
for sure.
PR.
And for each of the speakers' videos, we'll put together your whole bio and your whole website and just click link everything to follow all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think we're out of here.